Hello, welcome back to 1874. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Jonathan Johnson, European football expert and, of course, Villa fan today for a special show. I'll call everything a special show, but you catch my drift. It's not a normal show. We're not previewing anything or doing the normal stuff we do on the channel. We're going to be talking about Villa's incoming president of football operations, aka Villa's new sporting director. This show is sponsored by Match Bingo. If you head to 1874.io/matchbingo, you'll be able to buy bingo cards around all the football and sport that's going on at the moment. If you buy 4, you get 1 free. They're £2.50 each, and you can win between £25 and £250, depending on how lucky you are. And also, if you use the code 18741874 when depositing your money, you will get a 200% deposit bonus, which a week on, I still don't really know what that is, but hopefully one day somebody will tell me. So as I mentioned, I'm joined by Jonathan, delighted to be joined by Jonathan Johnson. And today we're going to be talking about Roberto Olabe. Am I pronouncing that right, Jonathan?
I think so. I think it's Olabe
that was good.
in Spanish, but no, I mean it's more or less correct. I don't think it's that difficult, sort of when you're reading it off the paper.
No, my accent doesn't lend itself to pronouncing continental names very, very well. It never has, except for Even Gasson, which I've really got down over the last few months. So, Jonathan, interestingly, you texted me yesterday when this happened and said you've actually spent some time with Roberto and interviewed him previously.
Yeah, so when I was with CBS Sports and there was some availability, I should give a shout out to sort of La Liga and the service that they offer in terms of creating interview opportunities for a lot of different media outlets. One of those interviews that was put forward was Alabi himself a couple of years ago, and it was a fascinating insight really into the guy. I think he touched on a lot of the different areas of where he had worked extremely hard along with the rest of the team to sort of shape the club and to turn Sociedad into, a really respectable, competitive side. Don't forget they were in the Champions League a couple of years ago as well. I remember them coming up against PSG when PSG made their run to the semi-finals before getting knocked out by Borussia Dortmund. And he was just a really engaging character, somebody who was very clearly, absolutely kind of addicted to football in the same way that Unai Emery is. So I don't think it'll come really as much of a surprise that there was actually strong rumours. So obviously as a Paris-based journalist covering PSG for the most part in French football, there was a time when Unai Emery was leaving PSG before he ended up going to Arsenal, where he was linked very heavily with Sociedad, and that was around about the time that Olabe had actually just returned to the club. So they do have sort of a previous relationship from their playing days. They know each other quite well, and obviously have fostered that relationship over the years. I think many people don't realise just how close Emery was actually to sort of going to Sociedad as manager before he ultimately took the Arsenal gig. And I think without taking the Arsenal position, it's difficult to say with any degree of certainty that he would have been Villa manager today. So I think this is, for me, a real coup for Villa. There's not been too much to shout about so far this season, obviously, with everything that's going on the pitch. But off the pitch, I think this is a real absolute steal, really. I think you look at the opportunity that was clearly created back in the summer when he departed Sociedad after a number of really impressive years of work. You look at the trading record, for example, that Sociedad have built up, nurturing some of these star names. Alexander Isak, for example, sort of prominent among them. And, I think that this is a really, really smart move by Villa. Very clearly an Unai Emery approved move as well. And I think really this just takes me back to a couple of years ago when Villa were quite close to landing Matteo Alemany from Barcelona. Obviously, we know that ultimately he opted against that move fairly late on when it already looked like the switch was on the verge of being completed. We know sort of what happened after that. Villa ended up going for Monchi, and sort of Monchi, Vidagani and Emery have kind of created this triangle of influence at Villa that is extremely important now to how the club functions. But it was quite clear that at that time, I'm not saying necessarily that Monchi, was not a top pick, but the priority for Villa, I think, at that time was if they couldn't get Alemany, they were looking at somebody like Olabe, but he was, quite content in his Sociedad role at the time. But there was discussion for Villa to potentially make a move for him, and it's easy to see why. So I think really this is essentially the result of a couple of years of kind of Emery and sort of Villa's leadership, kind of making the best, not of a bad situation, but of a situation that wasn't necessarily the same way that it was designed when Unai Emery was drawing up his really ambitious plans for turning Villa into a European force to be reckoned with once again. So I think this is kind of righting that missed opportunity from a couple of years ago. And I think one of the real key things that absolutely fascinated me, one, when I was interviewing him a couple of years ago, but two, now when I look at the situation that Villa have, the need to tap into the academy and stuff like that, is Olabe's expertise when it comes to developing, nurturing young talent and breaking that young talent into the first team.
Yeah, because we were talking before we came on and we were almost saying, look, this change of sporting director or club president of operations, whatever president of football, whatever the job title is, changing that isn't necessarily going to completely change Villa on the pitch right away. In fact, it's going to have absolutely no influence on what's happening on the pitch right now. But it's clear that Villa have been able to do this quickly because the guy's left Sociedad and he's out of work and he is taking over immediately from Monchi. When you talk of like Monchi, the way he came in and him maybe being a different style of sporting director to Almani and obviously different to Alabi as well. What do you think the key differences are between? So what's Alabi going to offer us that Monchi didn't?
I think one of the key things really, and I know it's a word that's maybe used a little too often these days, is sustainability. I think what you have to recognize with Monchi is that Monchi is very much somebody who thrives in a trading environment. He gets or identifies good value deals and then plans to extract an even bigger fee in the future, essentially sort of by flipping that talent within a couple of years of it arriving at the club. That's not necessarily a reflection of sort of his preferences. We have to understand that it was always a necessity for Sevilla, when he was sort of developing himself, into, the footballing executive that he is today. Sevilla needed him and his expertise in the transfer market to survive, because that's ultimately the way that Sevilla managed to enjoy so much success, not just in Europe, but also in terms of creating all of these extremely valuable players that ultimately saved Sevilla from a very, very harsh financial situation. Now, the financial situation of Villa was very different. There were more limitations in place. And also Emery is trying to grow something that is a long-term project, a long-term vision. And I don't think that those expectations necessarily match up in terms of what Emery wants from the players being brought in and the kind of profile of player that Monchi habitually has been able to go out and get, on the transfer market. I also think there is an element of sort of Monchi having been very comfortable in his previous stints with Sevilla, sort of given the power, that the club kind of entrusted him with. But also, there was, I think a motivation for Monchi to take the Villa job at the time, because Monchi's previous exploits outside of Spain with Roma hadn't exactly gone brilliantly. So I think many people are now starting to draw parallels sort of between his stints away from Sevilla and his stints sort of back in Spain, where he's sort of, at his strongest. In this scenario, it sounds like Monchi's sort of moving into a new role with V Sports, at least for the time being. I think it sounds quite similar to what happened with Lange before he ultimately moved on to Spurs. Whether we see Monchi sort of resurface somewhere else in the near future, we'll have to wait and see. But it seems to me that sort of Olabe, the main difference is that he will probably be better aligned with Emery in terms of identifying the type of player who can be brought in as a prospect, but then genuinely developed with a view to being part of the first team, instead of a lot of these sort of signings that feel like they're a bit of a gamble or a bit of a punt in the last couple of years in terms of increasing their value while sending them out on loan, and then ultimately being able to sort of cash in on them without them really ever playing that much of a role for Villa in the first team. And I think that ultimately is where some of Villa's transfer performance under Monchi has sort of fallen down. So I think Olabe will be able to not only maximise the talent that Villa already have in the academy, because there is significant talent there that's sort of untapped at this moment in time, but also identify different ways to sort of function within the financial limits that have driven everybody mad for the last sort of couple of years, really, and ultimately hopefully develop Villa into something that's a bit more of a sustainable kind of project that doesn't necessarily rely on major transfer expenditure and ultimately, will function identifying talent that can be nurtured by Emery through his expertise, and then turned into first team worthy talents.
From what you're saying, it feels like Alabi's maybe more of a bigger picture guy. They're going to have a more long term view, a zoomed out view on what's happening at Aston Villa compared to Monchi. I did a pod with Jacob Tanswell at The Athletic yesterday, and he was talking about like Emery's a win now manager, so all the signings that we've made, they very much function towards winning now, and I think that kind of points towards why Villa have got a lot of players who are at the peak or maybe just over their peak at the moment, between 28 and 31, 32 in terms of age. That's the bulk of the squad. Do you think this appointment maybe kind of points to that the club are going to change direction with what they're doing? Because it does feel at the moment that we're at the end of maybe the first cycle of Emery in that first 3 years.
Yeah, I don't think that that's inaccurate. I definitely think that there will have to be, some sort of short-term adjustments, and then sort of like a medium to long-term aim, that sort of overarching objective that's put in place. I definitely think that Olabe is sort of more of a big picture kind of signing, and I guess something that's kind of reassuring for Villa fans is, regardless of whatever sort of happens in the future, the club would be in very good hands with somebody of his stature in place. When you look at some of the other clubs that he was linked with as well before ultimately opting to join Villa, he's been linked with some of Europe's top clubs, so very clearly his reputation sort of speaks for himself. And I think now, with Emery, I think he's realising that this season maybe isn't going to go according to sort of initial hopes. It's going to be tough for Villa to get themselves back into the reckoning for continental qualification. That's not to say that it should be ruled out. We've seen Emery in the past sort of turn around very slow starts to the season and ultimately end up coming out in a pretty impressive position. But it does feel like sort of the clock is ticking right now, and I think more than anything, really what's missing at this moment in time is a collective mentality shift. Sure, I agree that perhaps this is the end of the first cycle of Emery, and perhaps one of Olabe's first tasks will be identifying the players who perhaps would be best served moving on soon, so perhaps not in the winter window but at the end of the season, and then bringing in some sort of cost-effective replacements, because let's not forget that Sociedad, the success that he had was not only based around bringing through, nurturing those superb talents from the Sociedad Academy, but also identifying sort of the free agents, experienced heads who could come in and sort of change that collective mentality, in the club's favour, and ultimately play sort of a mentoring role, which might not necessarily be sort of the best fit for some of Villa's current player profiles. So maybe there will be an emphasis for Olabe to seek out players with the right sort of mentality for what's required next, in order to sort of get Villa back into a position where we're sort of consistently competing for sort of those top European qualification positions and flirting again potentially with getting back into the Champions League, but being able to function within those financial limits that have proved so frustrating over the last couple of years.
Can you just talk around like some of the success stories that he's had at Sociedad in recent times? Obviously, there's Isak, there's Erdegaard as well, Zubamendi. There's a lot of success stories coming out of Sociedad over the last few years in his tenure, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's Kubo as well, the Japan international. And I think, but you look as well at sort of the the extra years of their career that he managed to get out of, a veteran David Silva, Nacho Monreal as well. I think that that's equally as impressive, because there's a lot of clubs that probably would have turned their nose up, not necessarily at David Silva, but someone like Monreal, and thought, well, he's kind of past it after his time with Arsenal. But ultimately, he turned out to be the sort of perfect acquisition at the right time. And I think it's that, sort of knowledge and understanding of the challenge that he's going to be facing that's going to prove so, valuable for Villa. And I think for Emery and Vidigani to have, somebody who's so sort of in tune with what Emery needs for the now, but also what Emery's requirements will be for the future as well. I think that, that will create a very interesting working dynamic. And I think that, this is ultimately, despite the fact that it feels like a very negative kind of moment in and around the club right now, ultimately I think that this is actually a hugely positive mood. And if results do start to pick up, which hopefully they do imminently, starting this week in Europe, I think that more and more people will be looking at Olabe's time with Sociedad and some of those success stories, and hoping that he's going to be able to replicate that in a different environment, but potentially, with a club and a project in front of him that ultimately feels like it could be sort of even bigger and better, with all due respect to Sociedad, which is a fantastic club, than what he's already achieved in the Basque Country.
I remember watching, there's a Netflix documentary about La Liga, and every episode it focused on a different club. And I remember the Sociedad episode, actually, and it was quite heavily focused around Kubo and how they do things. I had a little bit of this worry with Monchi, and I think in the end it probably proved a little bit right, that when you're working for a club like Sociedad, you're working in La Liga as in the sporting director role. It's very different to coming into the Premier League and doing it for a club like Villa that have different demands and different needs. Can you alleviate any fear that I have around the jobs just being so different?
I mean, obviously, it is going to be, a challenging task for him, and adapting, to the Premier League, adapting to his new surroundings is going to be a challenge. But I think also, you look at some other aspects of his CV, the time spent sort of preparing the Qatar national team for the World Cup. He spent a bit of time in South America as well. So he is somebody who's quite traveled, quite cultured already. Yes, you can sort of say that, I'll go into South America. There's quite a large kind of Spanish-speaking culture there, so maybe he wasn't sort of too sort of, outside of his element. But, he is respected as a top-level operator, and to have had the success that he's had in La Liga, I don't think that he has exhibited the same difficulties that Monchi already had before Villa sort of brought him in. So I think that there is reason to feel, optimistic that he is going to adapt to it. And of course, he's not sort of moving to a club that's kind of bereft, of kind of Spanish speakers and sort of his fellow Spaniards, because obviously we know that Villa operationally, have a large Spanish-speaking contingent now, and I think that will make it a lot easier for him to bed in, get right down into sort of the nitty-gritty with, sort of understanding the task at hand, perhaps also, offering a kind of outsider's view on sort of, reading the room in terms of the mentality and sort of what's going on so far this season, and perhaps with that sort of different way of thinking, maybe Emery and his staff are able to get to the bottom of these issues that seem to be plaguing Villa on the pitch faster than they have been able to do so far this season before Monchi's departure.
When you were talking, then I was thinking about how Austin McPhee might get on in the meetings when everyone just sat there speaking in Spanish. Austin McPhee just nodding his head. And, yep. I can just imagine like difficult times for Austin with all the Spanish speakers. He might actually be a fluent Spanish speaker. I don't know, but yeah, just had that picture running through my head for some reason when you started talking. So, in summary, then, Jonathan, this is one that we can get behind, and that we can be. I think we should be cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to be optimistic about anything at the moment. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about things.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the way to play it. I think this is, objectively, it's a very, very good appointment and a great get for Villa, and it would have been celebrated as such, regardless of where Villa were in the table, regardless of form. But I do think that it is, sort of dangerous to think that, one sort of off the field appointment is immediately going to turn around everything that's been going wrong with Villa's season so far. Ultimately, it is up to the players and the staff, collectively, to turn around the difficult run of form that Villa have been going through so far this season. Hopefully, like I said earlier in the show, it happens as quickly as possible. But, I think it's going to, take perhaps a couple of difficult decisions, maybe, like I said, with that kind of fresh impetus, that new set of eyes, maybe some hard decisions are easier to identify than others. And ultimately, something has to change. There has to be a mentality shift for Villa to get themselves out of this situation. And ultimately, that's not going to come just from one change to Villa's leadership structure off the field. That's going to happen, through the players, starting to pull their weight and take responsibility for what have been some really, really poor, uninspiring displays so far this season that have showed, unfortunately, little to no progression across all of the displays so far. So I think even if the poor results continue for a little while, as long as there is some kind of progress, something tangible to show that the players are finally starting to get back close to to their best level, I think Villa fans will still have to be quite patient, but it is absolutely vital now that Villa start getting back to winning ways as quickly as possible. And I view the next international break, especially with regards to how things are functioning off the pitch, as almost something of a sort of mini pre-season for Emery and his staff to really get, excited about in terms of really, being able to, try and hit the reset button on what's been a forgettable start to the campaign so far.
Well, Jonathan's explained very well what we can expect from Roberto Olabe. You're always a great guest that we get, and if you're excited, then I'm cautiously excited as well, Jonathan. So thank you ever so much for joining me today. And I must quickly give Neil Dunworth, my friend Neil from the For Love of Paul McGrath podcast, his flowers as well, because he called. This wasn't really anything that Jonathan may have known and not said anything, but no one really seemed to know that this was on the cards. And Neil was like, "Oh, this would be a great appointment. I don't think there's any world in which it would happen, but this would be a great appointment." And then 6 hours later, it was happening. So I should give Neil his flowers as well. Neil loves European football, and he called this as a great appointment as well. So Jonathan's cautiously optimistic. Neil's probably giddy, really excited, and massively optimistic, and I'm cautiously optimistic as well. So Jonathan, once again, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining me, mate.
Likewise, thanks a lot for having me. And yeah, credit to Neil. That was a fantastic shout, and I can hold my hands up and say that I wasn't expecting sort of the Alabi news, but that was a great bit of foresight there.
Right then, brilliant. What a great guest Jonathan is. Obviously a Villa fan and a European football expert as well, which is a deadly combination. Always great to talk to him, and he really provided some valuable insight there into Roberto Olabe. So thank you to Jonathan again for coming on the channel. Always a pleasure. Just a couple of bits of admin for me to do. I didn't want Jonathan to have to sit through my long-winded outro, so I thought I'd do it without him. First bit of business is that Jacob and I were in the Athletic podcast studio yesterday. So there's a show out on the Athletic now with Jacob and I talking about Villa's situation. Great to go back to my old stomping ground and talk about Villa, such a good company, the Athletic. So it was great to spend some time there and do that yesterday. Other shows on the channel to go back and check out. Did a solo show on Monchi yesterday and my thoughts on him leaving. So there's probably some relevant information in there if you want to go back and listen to that. Of course, don't forget the stuff I said about Match Bingo at the start as well. And don't forget to go to foundersdesign.co.uk and get yourself some Villa merch, some Villa hoodies, some of our lovely designs. If you want to get some Founders stuff, then you can go to foundersdesign.co.uk. Final one from me is that people quite often ask me, like, how can I support the channel? Because really enjoy the content, and obviously we're pumping out a lot at the moment. Now, never ever would move to a subscription model and make people pay for things, because I don't think that's right. I remember someone trying to do that before in the Villa content space and it didn't go down very well. Would never ever make that move at all. But what I have done, I've set up a buymeacoffee.com, and the link will be in the description, so you can basically donate money towards the channel if you feel that that's something that you would like to do. Nobody has to do that. Obviously, you're free not to. A few people have donated already, actually, which I really appreciate. It just helps the channel run. Maybe if I get enough, I can get some new equipment and things like that. But there's no pressure to do it whatsoever. But people do always ask, how can I support the channel? I'd like to put some money towards the content. So that's basically how you can do it. So the link's in the description. I think it's buymeacoffee.com/Dan Bardell. I tried to change the name to 1874 and it wouldn't let me do it. But yeah, that's the link. So if you do want to donate some money towards the channel, no pressure at all. I'm not expecting to suddenly be a millionaire overnight or anything like that. But if you do like what we do on the channel and you want to support us, then that's how you can do it. So yeah, don't forget to check out Match Bingo, 1874.io/Match Bingo, or you can scan the QR code that's now handily on the screen in front of you. Need to do a Bologna preview, so I imagine that's going to be out at some point today or in the morning. So watch out for that. Keep your eye on our social so you know when all the content's coming out. As ever, have a great day. Only one thing left to say: up the Villa.